And then let's say by some weird, miraculous chance that we didn't see coming, given that Trump is ahead, has a 66% chance of winning, looks like he's going to get the electoral count, and Joe still wins. Well, then what do you do after you win? How do you convince anyone that's real? Mm-hmm. Have they even thought of that? Like, even the Dems behind the scenes better hope he doesn't win because no one's going to believe it. While the Dems kind of like created a moat around Biden to keep away actual challengers. And now they're stuck with this guy. And I'm going to repeat what I said yesterday. You got to reconsider your choice, because if you somehow pull this out with some kind of shenanigans, I hasten to use that word so lightly, but shenanigans, you're going to deal with a public who doesn't buy the election. You know, they're going to go like, how did that win?
Don't point at me.
How did that? No, I'm pointing at Biden. It's because we got it out. How did that win? We don't buy it.
This is Democracy Watch. Mark, that was Greg Gutfeld laying the foundation, as he and Fox has been doing for days now, that Americans won't accept the election results if Trump loses. So the natural conclusion of this is the violence that we already saw once. Does Fox have legal exposure for laying this framework again in light of what already happened on January 6th?
I don't think they care. I mean, I think Fox, cares a little bit about the Smartmatic and Dominion voting cases, voting machine cases, because those led to big dollar verdicts at the hands of those corporations. But I think that, whether it's Rupert Murdoch or the leadership of Fox News, I think that they have put out the message that they will be 100% irresponsible in laying the foundation for contesting the 2024 election if Joe Biden wins, and for whatever the consequences are. They are, Rupert Murdoch is a billionaire. He's an elderly guy. Fox News is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So I think they have internalized whatever consequence they may have, whether it's legal exposure for civil lawsuits, whether it is defamation lawsuits, whether it is a loss of advertisers other than people selling pillows. Like, they don't care. They have decided that poisoning their audience's minds and creating the environment where their viewers do not accept the outcome of the elections because they've been lied to for months and months and years is worth it to them. So shame on them.
Right. I've said it before. I mean, this isn't a bug of their model. This is the model. This is a feature of the model. This is the whole point. It's not paying these lawsuits, for example, is not a cost of doing business. That is their business. Yeah. It's lying, and if it costs them money, then it costs them money because that is what they do. They don't do anything else aside from that. It is perpetuating these disinformation campaigns that will inevitably cost them money if they end up in court for it, which I guess raises the question, if there's not a company, for example, that's been harmed, and I know that we can make the argument that the American people have been harmed, but it's going to be much harder to bring those cases. So if there's not a Dominion or a Smartmatic, is it still, I guess, possible to bring cases forward where the recipient of these disinformation campaigns, these lies, these defamatory claims are just the American people or are just democracy?
Yeah, no, not on behalf of the American people, and unfortunately not on behalf of democracy. I mean, you did see the two election workers in Georgia bring civil claims against Rudy Giuliani. So you can have individuals, not just corporations. You can have individuals who are harmed. We saw some lawsuits by some of the injured police officers, some civil cases that they brought. So there are ways to bring cases, but I think you've hit on the point, which is that the media has a responsibility not just to its corporate bottom line. It has a responsibility not just to its audience. It has a responsibility to the Constitution. The First Amendment is not the only part of the Constitution, and we hear the media talk about the First Amendment a lot. But the mainstream media needs to view upholding free and fair elections and upholding American democracy as core to its mission. And Fox News has not just abandoned that, they are in contempt of that. Right. They regularly spread disinformation about, for example, the state of the election. Part of what this guy on Fox News was saying was just untrue about how close the elections are. He is trying to say that, look, no one will accept it if Joe Biden wins because everybody knows that it's going to be a landslide for Donald Trump. That's not true. That just isn't true. Like, the polls are neck and neck. It is 1 point either way. And I think if you had to put a percentage on it right now, you would say odds are that Joe Biden wins. So they are conditioning their electorate to not accept that, or their viewers to not accept that. And it's, like I said, the only word I can use for it is shameful.
You mentioned First Amendment rights. So where does First Amendment free speech stop and then legal liability to inciting violence begin? And I ask that because we can already see how this kind of speech incited violence before. So how does precedent factor in here?
Yeah, I'm very, very worried about this very point. At both the macro level and also at the micro level. What do I mean by that? So we obviously have the kinds of incitement that we see the former president engage in, what we saw then President Trump do in the lead up to January 6th. But look at the language he is using today. It is actually much more incendiary, and we are still months away from the election. So that's at a very macro level. You have the question of, what people say on Fox News' air. And I say that, by the way, because in some respects, they are just amplifying what Donald Trump is saying, but also adding to the fuel to that fire. But we see it in the micro as well. We see it in the efforts by right-wing organizations to sue states for the right to harass election officials, claiming that they have a First Amendment right. And that's something that Democracy Docket has covered. It's something that, is at a much more local level or a state level, but it basically is the same principle, right? They're saying that, look, we are allowed to engage in the harassment of election officials because it is free speech. And what's really remarkable about this, Brian, is that 8 years ago, it would have been unthinkable that a political movement would align itself with people who want to harass election officials. It would have been unthinkable that a network like Fox News would be airing the kind of vitriol, the kind of nonstop lies, the disinformation, the misinformation, and the efforts to promote election denialism that they do today. So in some ways, First Amendment law has not caught up to the norms that we expect responsible news outlets to engage in. So where is that line? With a conservative Supreme Court, you tell me where you think that line will be.
Right. I understand that. When you're dealing with these cases where we're litigating the legality of certain speech that may be incendiary, do you have to take into account the what that speech has resulted in the past? Like can we take into account the fact that whereas this speech in a vacuum prior to January 6th might have been okay, but now knowing that the direct result of this kind of speech was January 6th, does that change the calculus here?
Yeah.
For a court that was acting in good faith, I should ask, because for the Clarence Thomases and Samuel Alitos of the world, I don't think it's going to matter. But for the regular justice system, if they were dealing with this issue.
Yeah. So look, I think that there is obviously there are two principles at stake, right? There is, you don't want to clamp down on people's free speech. On the other hand, you do not want to allow them to incite violence. And where one begins and the other starts is always going to be are going to create a lot of hard cases. I do think, and I think the law reflects, that one of the ways you can predict whether or not something is going to incite violence is based on past behavior. I mean, why is it that people think that shouting fire in a crowded theater is not protected speech, right? Will incite dangerous conditions? Well, because there's actually a history of people who have shouted fire in a crowded theater, and so there is always going to be this question of whether or not you're going to give a heckler's veto. Does the fact that people react badly in the past going to prevent speech in the future? But I think when it comes to the core protection of democracy, there is a line from a Supreme Court case from 50 or 60 years ago that says that, the First Amendment is not a suicide pact. And I think we need to keep that in mind sometimes, that, the First Amendment right to free speech is not a suicide pact that we entered into as a nation to allow for the destruction of democracy. And when it comes to how we interpret the line between free speech and incitement in the area of trying to overturn free and fair elections, storming of the Capitol. You know, I think we have to err on the side against free speech. Whereas in other areas, we might err in favor of the speaker. The First Amendment is not a suicide pact.
I think that's perfectly put. Well, in the meantime, you know, to your earlier point, shame on these hosts at Fox who are just perpetuating this violence against this country, especially in light of what they know will be violence, because we've already seen it on January 6th. We will, of course, stay on top of this issue as it continues to percolate or perpetuate based on what Fox is doing right now. With that said, for those watching right now, to support the invaluable work that Marc and his team are doing, please sign up for Democracy Docket. It's the free news outlet he founded to focus on everything voting in elections, an amazing resource that I use on a daily basis. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.